Alright, so for my commentary, I chose the poem A Bronzeville Mother Loiters in Mississippi While a Mississippi Mother Burns Bacon. And this poem was written by Gwendolyn Brooks and was published in the Bean Eater series in 1960. And basically, the focus of the Bean Eater series is the civil rights movement. Of course, you can see that pretty obviously, as this entire poem is about the death of Emmett Till. Now, I chose to focus on the last 22 lines, which I have numbered here that you should be able to see up and down this side. So basically, what overall the sort of my thesis for this portion of the poem is that the thought of Emmett's death sort of surrounds Mrs. Bryant, and it's inescapable. It's all-consuming. There's not really anything she can do to get away from it. And this can be seen through the use of language, structure, and technique. So to begin, we have a heavy use of really interesting language throughout this poem. Of course, there's this phrase right here, fine prints. That, of course, is in reference to Roy Bryant, and he's called the Fine Prince because in the state of Mississippi, he was sort of seen as having done the good thing, been the hero, the Fine Prince, sort of the savior, as if almost the story was a fairy tale. And so to extend on that, the next line, or on the same line, says, he whispered something about love and night and intention, and that can be read as the night that Roy and his brother obviously kidnapped and killed Emmett Till, and that was sort of his actions on that night were out of love, and his intention to kill Emmett Till was because he obviously loved his wife. The next line you see here, shining steel, that's sort of a reference to the heavy piece of metal that Emmett Till was tied to and then thrown in the river. She heard no hoofbeat of the horse and saw no flash of shining steel. It didn't really, she didn't really see the fine prince as the heroic knight in shining armor riding up on a horse that this line is sort of suggesting. To extend on that, we have down here in line 7, 8, and 9, his mouth wet and red, so very, very, very red, closed over hers. These lines really show how, of course you get some imagery, wet and red, very, very red. That's blood imagery, as of course there was a lot of blood during the beating and murder of Emmett Till. And so by having Mrs. Bryant describe her husband's mouth like this, it's sort of placing the imagery that she sees, all that she's able to see as her husband is going in to kiss her is all of the blood and all of the terrible actions that he performed while killing Emmett Till. As you can see here, sickness heaved within her, the courtroom Coca-Cola, the courtroom beer, and hate and sweat and drone. These two lines, line 10 and 11, are really important because by saying courtroom Coca-Cola, courtroom beer, Gwendolyn Brooks mentions this in some of her earlier poems, specifically The Preacher Ruminates Behind the Sermon. That's sort of a representation of all of the normal things of a courtroom, all of the standard things, so Coca-Cola, beer, those are sort of all the traditional things you find in a courtroom. And basically, what happened in the courtroom is sort of dwelling up inside of her, pushing against her like a wall. She wants to continue to bear the fact that the trial wasn't fair, but at the same time, the idea that it was not fair wouldn't go away, as you can see in this line. And it also, this use of decapitated exclamation points is really interesting because that is really visual, really gruesome way of putting just pupils in, of representing the pupils in Mrs. Till's eyes as she sat there in the courtroom, obviously knowing that there wasn't anything that she could do to make the trial just or to convict Roy Bryant. Line 17 and 19 here are really interesting because she finally has a hatred for him, whereas all throughout the poem previously, she doesn't really express her feelings directly about him, but right here it shows hatred and burst into a glorious flower. So you can see that obviously it's all surrounding. You see here magnolias. That's the state flower of Mississippi. It's a really big flower. It's a really strong smell. So again, you can see the encompassingness of the death right there. There is some use of structure here. Obviously, you've got a shift right here, which is pretty important to note after line 14. It sort of goes from like her thoughts, her internal reflection to what she does. You know, she can't really scream. She can't really go out and tell everyone that what her husband did was wrong, because obviously no one would accept that in Mississippi. So, you know, she's sort of just forced to sit there and endure, let the hatred burst into a flower and enclose around them. Technique, there's this use of courtroom Coca-Cola and courtroom beer, as I mentioned earlier. Those are sort of the average things that you find in the courtroom. The things, just like the overall atmosphere of the courtroom, is represented well in those two lines. And then down here on line 20, 21, and 22, you have the last bleak noose of the ballad, the rest of the rugged music, and the last quatrain. So this is sort of a conclusion to, you know, her, how she feels about Emmett's murder. There's not really anything she can do. The last of the news fades out, the last of the rugged music. This use of rugged music right here is interesting because it sort of reminds me of the film Deliverance, where they've got like that rough backwoods kind of music. That banjo duel obviously is in the film, but it sort of just represents the backwoodsness and the old time ways that Mississippi had of doing things. Obviously, Roy Bryant was definitely guilty, but was ruled to be innocent in the court case. So overall, in conclusion, this poem is really about how bad things can be, sometimes bad things are done out of love, but the fact that they're a bad thing, you know, a murder or robbery or something like that, doesn't excuse the fact, doesn't excuse them being bad. It doesn't make it okay for you to do bad things because they're out of love.